मैंने ऊपर मेरे मेल पे खोल के दूसरा क्रॉस कर दो एक बार नीचे म्यूट कर अभी गलत है I-29 यही खुला है ना ये शो करना
कैसे करूँ उसको?
हाँ अब आप ये प्रेजेंट स्क्रीन आप देन आर यू एबल टू सी माय स्क्रीन
बट ये तो हो ही नहीं रहा ना यहाँ
यस नहीं हो रहा है देखो शेयरिंग
now
Yes, sir.
now are you able to see
Yes,
my
yes.
screen?
Yes, sir. Yes. What, sir?
Okay, can you? Okay.
Your introduction will be given by my colleague. So, can we start, sir?
Yeah, we can start.
Okay, then. Madam.
Okay. Hello, good morning everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. Today we are presenting webinar on global conflicts, genesis, effects and remedies, organized by Applied Science and Humanities Department of Parul Polytechnic Institute, Parul University. The main agenda of this webinar is to resolve global conflicts which can prevent economic, social and environmental progress across the globe. I, Vaishali Nathwani, would like to introduce today's presenter, Colonel Karamveer Singh Tanwar. He is enthusiastic, collaborative, and goal-oriented Indian Army officer with 20 years of diverse and enriching experience in security operations. He is capable of achieving organization and business goals in a senior managerial role by developing constructive and sustainable processes, team building, and problem solving to deliver time-bounded results. He has led a team of 12 personnel in counter-terrorism environment. He is appointed as director in the think tank of Indian Army. He has successfully conducted security operations with counter-terrorism force in Kashmir. He is being awarded as Force Commander Commendation Card in United Nations. Jai Hind, sir. It's a privilege to welcome you here. We can start with the session, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. And at the outset, I would like to thank ma'am, your university, and Mr. Patel especially to give me an opportunity to interact with the students on this topic. Now, the today's topic is global conflict, its genesis, effects, and remedies. Now, why I have chosen this topic is that because I'll be interacting with the youth. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
Mr. Patel, I hope you can see.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now,
Yes, sir.
why this topic is important that we focus on all the issues of the progress in all the fields, whether it is space field, agriculture field, infrastructure, engineering. We focus on everything. But when a conflict arises in a civilization or a country, in that case, the entire effort of maybe 100 years or 150 years of that nation, it goes in vain. Everything comes to standstill if there is a global conflict in that country. So, my point is that till the time we don't resolve the global conflicts, the net sum of the progress will always be zero. Now, I'm just showing you a map in which you can see a faded world map, and there are certain figures which are given indicating the numbers of refugees which are there in various parts of the world. Now, when you talk about Myanmar, there are 10 lakh plus refugees. Afghanistan, 26 lakh. Syria, 66 lakh. When I'm saying Syria, I mean the complete Middle East. It includes the area of Iraq, Syria, and balance of the Middle East. You go towards South Sudan, 22 lakh. Somalia, 9 lakh plus. You go to Central African Republic, Scar region, 6 lakh almost. Congo, 7 lakh plus. Now, when crores of people, they don't have home because of the various conflicts, then there is a need to do introspection, that whether as a humanity, as a global village, as a global community, are we progressing? Are we doing enough for peaceful coexistence in the world or not? So in today's topic, I will not talk about the individual progress. I will talk about the collective progress of either countries or civilization. Now, one of the most important reasons to choose this topic for the students of university was that these days there were a lot of sentiments of going to war with China. I interacted with number of people, and especially in the, my civilian friends and all, and they always had a question that why can't we go for, go for war with China and resolve the matter once for all. As a army person, they always expected that I will definitely endorse their idea, and I'll say that yes, but it's not like that. You need to understand that in conflict, nobody gets benefited. Everybody is at loss. War has not given any solution till date. Now, if we talk about India, we must understand that we are living in one of the most volatile region. You see the map of India on the screen, and you can see the neighboring countries. Now, when I am showing you this map, I am talking about half of the world, because the population of India and China combined constitutes 37% of the world's population. And if you add the population of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the neighboring countries, which are being shown in the map, so the total population, it's almost about 50%, almost touching 50% of the population of the world. And I call it the most volatile region. And now why I call it most volatile region? Because all three countries are nuclear states. They have nuclear missiles. We all are aware. It's a known fact. They all have conducted adequate tests, and if required, they can fire nuclear weapons on the other countries. Second is that recent war histories you see with Pakistan. The first war which we had was in 1947-48, immediately after the independence. Second was in 65, thereafter 71, and we had a small conflict of Kargil. That was a limited war in 1999. China, we had a war in 1962. So, three nuclear nations with the history of number of wars in recent past. I am not talking about medieval history or maybe 500 years back. I'm just talking about after 50s, 1950, after Second World War. Second issue is border disputes. All three countries, we have border disputes with both the countries. And the border disputes are, it's not a small area, but these disputes are of the tune that some countries are claiming the entire state. That state, we own that state. So that kind of border dispute we have. So that is why, I just wanted to explain, I want to explain you that we are very vulnerable. When I had shown the slide of the refugees, immediately the first thought which comes to the mind is, it cannot happen to us. No, it can happen, because we are living in a very volatile region. You see that ideologies. India has got a democratic elected government. Now, when we talk about China, China has communist government. And when we talk about Pakistan, technically you might say that they have got democratic government. Prime Minister is elected one. But we all know, the entire world knows, that in Pakistan, military power is supreme. So the different kind of ideologies with nuclear states, border disputes, war history, terrorism in J&K, another factor. Now I will just elaborate this, that terrorism in how terrorism in J&K makes this region as volatile region. You see, one action of one individual, Pulwama blast, planning might have been done at a very large platform, and number of people, I understand that they were involved in this. Maybe the entire ISI was involved in this, but action of one individual forced India to carry out surgical strikes in Pakistan. So action of one individual, wherever terrorism is there, like in J&K, action of one terrorist might be such that they might take us to war. China, you see, they have given a lot of ideological support to Naxals, and Naxal was a big problem. Still, it is a problem in remote areas of central India. So these are the issues which makes the region very volatile region. We have, you all are aware, those who have traveled to Dharamsala, they all are aware that Dalai Lama, he is there in Dharamsala. That's the sore point of China. There is a government in exile which is functioning from Dharamsala, so that's a bone of contention between both India and China. So refugee, I mean, the moment you say somebody that if conflict takes place, people become refugees and these problems occur, then everybody says, no, it cannot happen in India. But they must understand that just about 75 years back, the entire country was being ruled by Europeans. They used to call us slave. So we are vulnerable, and this can happen to us also. These kind of conflicts can emerge in this region also, and we should be wise enough. The young generation should be wise enough that they should ensure that, because the strategic thinking of the young generation should be such that they should never allow to erupt these kind of conflicts in this region. I'll give you just one example of Europe, that what kind of culture they have, strategic culture and rational thinking. They had we all are aware, World War II, 1945 it finished. Now that time you see the map, and when you see towards Italy, France, Germany, I mean Italy, Germany, everybody knows that they were together fighting with France, and so much of chaos was taking place in 1945. But after that, what happened? After that, unification of Germany, East Germany, and which everybody knows. So they reconciled, and the unification of Germany could take place in late 80s, I believe, late 80s or early 90s. And now Germany, everybody knows it's one of the supreme power. Then rolling of common currency. The continent which was fighting, and they fought 2 world wars, they had rolled out a common currency, euro. Border disputes, when we talk about Asia, Africa, there are so many border disputes. But when we talk about Europe, it's very difficult to pick some border dispute, and there are so many countries you see, and you see their area. They are small countries. They are not big countries like which we have in Asia and Africa. Insurgency, when we talk about UK and Ireland insurgency, they sorted out the matter, and they are now peacefully living in that area. So their thought process, their culture is mutual destruction is not permitted in their culture, and coexistence. They believe in coexistence, and that is why this continent is progressing. And you see, the standard of living, the happiness index, everything is better in Europe because of their culture. You might be very wise, you might be having good infrastructure, but if you don't have that strategic culture and thought process of coexistence, then one day some conflict will arise and will destroy the entire country. Now I'll give you one more example. Now this is a positive example. Now I'm giving you different kind of example of Afghanistan. Now, Afghanistan, when you see Afghanistan on map, Mr. Patel, I hope you can see the map and all.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when you see Afghanistan, Afghanistan is a landlocked country. The only disadvantage is that it doesn't have seaport. But you see how many countries share border with Afghanistan. It's the strategic location. And if you see, the Afghanistan is known as gateway to Central Asia. And that is the reason, if you go into history, everybody wanted to control Afghanistan. So, and when you talk about the minerals, it has got extensive resources of minerals. Extensive. But the culture in Afghanistan was of tribal warlords. They never believed in unification. The race was very strong. And if you see from 1979 onwards, they fought with Russians for 10 years. Now, that time USSR was the world power, supreme power. During that time, they could contest with USSR, so the race was quite powerful. But what happened? I'll just give you a small story on this race. That this race they used to take pride in fighting, and they were one of the ferocious fighters in the world. 1992, when Taliban came to power, they decided that we are the one of the largest producer of poppy, but we will stop it, and they stopped it. And till 2001, if you see the graph, poppy cultivation had come almost to zero, because Taliban decided that we will not grow poppy. But once US invaded Afghanistan, thereafter, if you see the graph, it has gone up. And the beauty is that everybody says that we have so many programs to stop the drugs in Afghanistan. But if you see, they are growing poppy and they are the largest consumer of poppy. So what happened? The entire race, who were the ferocious fighter in the world, they all have become drug addict. And in today's world, the highest desertion rate of the soldiers is in Afghan army. They're running away from their duties. And if you see the videos posted on YouTube and all, you will find hundreds of youths taking drug. It has become part of their lifestyle. So the entire race has been destroyed. Infrastructure in Afghanistan has, 20 years of war now, 19 years, and there is no infrastructure there. Poverty, human slavery, everything. You see, the culture, people were good, everything was good, but the strategic culture was not there, that vision was not there, so a country got destroyed despite of its rich mineral resources, strategic location. And now when US is withdrawing now from Afghanistan, they have decided that they will withdraw their forces. Obviously, the government and the Taliban, that conflict is there, but there is another concept of IS Khorasan. They say that Taliban is one issue. Now, Islamic State of Khorasan, which they claim that it has got part in Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. So they are ready to fight with Taliban now. So even if US goes out from there, the civil war will continue. And actually, they have gone into Stone Age, that entire country. I have done courses with the Afghan officers, and I can assure you that they are very good. They are very intelligent people. As far as they are very good in isolation. But when it comes to collective progress and strategic thought process, that is missing somewhere there. Another example I'll give you, we'll talk about Iraq. You see the graph in orange. In 1989, you see that their GDP was quite good. And thereafter, you see it has dropped until 2003. It could never recover the GDP of 1989. That was the kind of destruction which took place because of the war. Now, after 2003, the government changed and thereafter, there were so many conflicts there in Iraq. We are aware, sectarian violence, rise of ISIS and all. So country is totally destroyed. Now here I'll just give you a sequence that in 1990, when Saddam Hussein decided to invade Kuwait, he spoke to the ambassador of US, April Gillespie, and he said, suppose we have a conflict, small conflict with Kuwait, and Iraq is, fourth largest army in the world. Now, if we invade Kuwait, what will be the reaction of United States? Now, April Gillespie discussed it with the government of United States, and she gave a statement, diplomatic statement to Saddam Hussein that that's a conflict between two Arab brothers. So it was an indication to Saddam Hussein that you can go ahead. So what he did, he immediately launched the armored divisions, and Kuwait is a very small country. So in just a time period of less than 24 hours, they had captured Kuwait. But what happened? US 7th Fleet, it turned towards Iraq. And then Saddam Hussein spoke to April Gillespie, and he said, just about 48 hours back, you said that it will be a conflict between two Arab brothers. And now there are certain statements and US forces are moving towards Iraq. She said, these are the decisions of the government and may change. And thereafter, the rest is history. We all know what happened. And second is OPEC. Iraq and Kuwait both were the part of founding members. They are founding members of OPEC. Now, if you are founding members of OPEC and your dispute is on oil, Iraq had blamed Kuwait that they had done slant drilling and they have stolen some oil of Iraq. They could have resolved it. My point is that the leadership should have strategic vision to avoid global conflicts. Now, Saddam Hussein and his team, they failed. Even if April Gillespie was putting a trap for them, they should have known that this will give a reason for Western powers to come into Middle East, and thereafter a war can take place. But they couldn't visualize. Their team couldn't visualize the same. That was a failure. And Iraq is one of the oldest civilization. And now you see the state there. The total destruction of infrastructure. The Tigris River is flowing, but there are water schemes which are next to Tigris River, but because of lack of infrastructure and destruction of infrastructure, people are not getting clean water to drink there next to Tigris. That's the kind of destruction which has taken place in entire civilization, and for next 20, 30 years, 40 years, situation is not going to improve. Kofi Annan, I have read a book of Kofi Annan. Now in that book, he mentions that in 2003, when US forces were about to invade Iraq, Kofi Annan wanted to stop this war. And the last bone of contention was that Saddam Hussein had refused to get the palaces inspected by the team which had come to Iraq. He said, no, you can't inspect my palaces. And they were blaming that Iraq has got chemical weapons, nuclear weapons, and those facilities, biological weapons and all. He said, I have none. So they said that everything is hidden there in your palaces. He refused. He said, no, you cannot. I am the president. You can't come and audit my palaces. Kofi Annan flew there, and Kofi Annan spoke to, and that book is written by Kofi Annan himself. And he said that Saddam Hussein, somehow he was able to convince, and Saddam Hussein said, okay, if you can stop the war, they can come and audit my palaces. Kofi Annan came back, and he told the same thing to US and the coalition forces. But they said, no, it's now too late. Now, my point is that Kofi Annan was the Secretary General of UN. He should have resigned. His stature was such a stature that he could have turned the winds. He could have said that, no, you cannot go in. You please go and audit the palaces And you can't destroy a country like this. So again, I'll say, Kofi Annan himself says, and now he's no more a good gentleman, and he himself says that he has got that regret, and he has written in that book. Now I'll give you a small anecdote of sectarian violence. Now sectarian violence, Shia-Sunni violence, we know that Shia-Sunni, I mean in India, being secular country, we don't have that kind of division between them. But in Middle East, it is there. I have been to Yemen, and I know that what kind of, I mean, they have this kind of division. Now, when forces were ready, there was a red team. Red team is that which critically analyzes the plan of the forces and all. So red teamers were taking inputs there, and there was a Shia cleric. And Shia cleric told them that, now for this, I'll just show you a map. Shia cleric explained them that you must understand the dynamics of Middle East before coming into Middle East. Now you see the cursor, he explained them that Iran is a Shia country. Iraq was not a Shia country, but Shias were almost about 60% in Iraq. See, now it was ruled by a Sunni. Syria is opposite. There are more Sunnis, but regime was Shia. Now again, Lebanon is Shia. So they said that if you topple the government here in Iraq, then a Shia crescent will emerge from Iran, then it will go to Iraq. Again Shia government, then again Shia ruling party, and then again Lebanon Shia. So this will be a Shia crescent, which will never be accepted by Saudi Arabia and the Sunnis. They will feel dominated. And a new conflict will emerge. Saddam will go, but a Shia-Sunni conflict will emerge in this region, and this region will never be stable. Red teamers prepared a report, submitted it, it still exists, that if we go like this, then maybe after 5 years, 6 years, this conflict will emerge. And but no, the people said that it's too late now. And we all know that 2007, when Iran had Shia government, Iraq had Shia government, and Syria had Shia government, then the Sunnis who were residing in Syria and Iraq, they felt threatened, and sectarian violence started. And they got support from Al-Qaeda, and that is how ISIS was born here. And thereafter we know what all happened here in this region. Again, the short-sightedness, I would say, that they had disturbed the region, entire region. And now because of the conflict, we know what kind of situation is there in Iraq and Syria. And you can't rebuild that the same Iraq and Syria. So much of destruction has taken place. So that was about the sectarian violence. Now, once this conflict started, sectarian conflict started, now it is very interesting to know that what was happening in Syria that time. Now in Syria, ISIS, obviously they were Sunnis, and they were obviously they wanted the Sunni dominance in the region. But what was US doing there? I'll tell you, the players in Syria, US never wanted ISIS to capture the entire Syria and topple the government in Damascus. So US, instead of directly getting involved in Syria, started training Kurdish fighters. Now when US started training Kurdish fighters, and they had given them the logistic support and training support and all, then Turkey got threatened, because Kurds want a Kurdistan which has got some part in Turkey. So Turkey got threatened. Then Russia was supporting Assad regime, so Russia got involved. Then Iran wanted Assad regime, so Iran got involved. Israel obviously was with US, so Israel got involved. Hezbollah started supporting Syria, they got involved. And Saudi Arabia was indirectly supporting the Sunnis, so they also got involved. So entire region and the Syria became the hotbed. Now my point is that in case the vision is narrow, then you might construct hundreds of university, thousands of hospitals, best of the infrastructure in your country, but when we talk about a bit of 100 year, the sum total will be zero because of the conflict. One conflict will destroy entire infrastructure, entire human race, and then to rebuild it, it will take 500 years. So that kind of destruction takes place in the global conflicts. And you know, in Yemen, we all know, I mean, poorest country, and you see the location, it has got strategic location. And Yemen, they used to call, I've been to Sana'a and all, and they used to call it jewel. And now you go and see the state of Aden port and Sana'a. It's like a war-torn country. So that is why our focus should be to avoid any kind of conflict. A small conflict of this Korea 1953, this war took place. Obviously, it was a proxy war. China was communist, Russia was communist, and North Korea was communist, and they were expanding the communist ideology towards South China Sea, and the US had gone to South Korea, and somehow they were able to contain them. But now what happened? Now the border between North Korea and South Korea, 38th parallel, it is the most militarized border in the world. I'm talking about this war took place in 1953, and now I'm talking in 2020. So the conflict started and it could not be resolved. So that is the kind of long-lasting effect which we have because of the global conflict. Now conflicts in India. You see Jammu and Kashmir. Now Jammu and Kashmir, most of us have seen, it's one of the most beautiful places, Kashmir Valley. I had 5 tenures there. I spent all army officers, they get posted there. So they get good insight in Kashmir Valley. Now it has got so much of potential for tourism industry, for pharma industries and all, and the soil is fertile, everything is there. But because of conflict, if you go there, you will find that there are certain areas where even electricity poles are not there. That infrastructure development has not taken place. The roads are poor, and now everybody knows that J&K is, if you compare J&K with Maharashtra, we can't do it. With Gujarat, we can't do it. They are lagging behind. Similarly, you go and see Northeast. I have been there in Nagaland twice, got posted there. You see mostly, I've seen the area, best of the people, and so much of potential is there, but that area, the infrastructure is, it's very poor. Now we are building it. Now conflict is getting resolved. So once we have the peace deals and all, so now things have started moving there. And I'll give you a small example. November or December last year, just about 8-9 months back, I was there in Nagaland, and we got to know that Shinzo Abe, Japanese Prime Minister, was supposed to visit Guwahati along with the delegation, the business delegation. Now, you know, he was coming with the idea to spend almost about $2 billion in Northeast. The business team was accompanying Shinzo Abe, Japanese Prime Minister. We all know that what kind of economy is Japan now. But what happened? There was some dispute which was going on, and that was of NRC. And people started protesting in Guwahati. And a situation developed wherein Japanese Prime Minister was but they decided that because of the situation, Japanese Prime Minister visit cannot take place, and they delayed it. But what happened after that? The business delegation, which was coming to Northeast, they said that we cannot invest in a region where our Prime Minister cannot land. So we lost out on such a big investment. Minimum 1 lakh jobs would have been created. So because of just a small conflict, some protests, we lost out. And leaders, everybody was aware. I understand the people who are protesting and all, maybe because of their age profile, their lack of knowledge, but the leadership which are promoting the protest and all, they could have waited. They could have ensured, they could have had that kind of vision that we can't protest during this time because we will lose out. So that happened. So again, conflict. Now, whatever you do in isolation, but because of these things, the general public and the population in that region, they lose out so many things. Now, in the latest scenario, I'll give you one example. Now, what is happening that this is Ethiopia, and everybody has heard about Nile dispute. This is the latest dispute, and these days we read it in newspapers also, and there are so many news about the Nile dispute. Now, what is this dispute? This dispute is that Blue Nile is originating from here, you see my cursor, and moving to Sudan, and it is moving to Egypt, and finally merging with Mediterranean Sea. And 80 to 90% of the water comes from Blue Nile. Now Ethiopia decided to build a dam here, the red spot. And now Ethiopia says that if they build a dam out here, they will get 6.45 gigawatt of electricity. That will change the face of Ethiopia. Now, in 2011, when Arab Revolution, Jasmine Revolution was taking place, so Ethiopia started constructing this dam because that time the government was being toppled in Egypt. They could have never given attention to this thing. Ethiopia started constructing, and now Ethiopia has started filling the dam after about 9 years. I'll not say that it will go dry, but reduction of water will definitely affect the economy. And right now is the time when we can resolve the issue. They can have a treaty that this much of water will keep flowing from Blue Nile, balance you can keep, some kind of treaty. No, there is a deadlock. There are no talks on. But if this matter doesn't get resolved now, you will find that 20 years down the line or 15 years down the line, both the countries will have either a direct war, or Egypt, what Egypt will do, Egypt will support some kind of insurgency in Ethiopia through Somalia. History exists, they can do it. Now, right now, world should get, I'll say at least UN should interfere, or the world leaders should interfere and should resolve the matter. Because what will happen, that right now, Ethiopia is filling the dam, they will produce electricity, then they will be waiting for prosperity, and 10 years people will work hard, and then what will happen, this area will be, insurgency will emerge in this area, and that insurgency
Due to technical issue from the presenter side, we'll continue within 5 minutes. Sorry for the inconvenience.
Can you see the screen now?
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't know this. I don't know. You lost contact here or on this slide?
You just present your presentation, sir.
Okay.
The presentation is not visible.
Okay. Just a second. I'll just present it.
Okay.
The connection issue is from the speaker side. Line is okay.
Yes, sir. Line is okay, sir.
Can you see the presentation now?
Yes, sir. Now it is visible. Yes.
So we lost out on this slide or previous slide?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This slide.
This slide. Okay. So what I was telling that ma'am, I'll just give you a call, ma'am. I'm in a webinar, ma'am. Ma'am, I'll just give you a call. Can you hear me, Mr. Patel?
Voice is visible, but sir.
Can you hear me?
Slide. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, and can you see the slide now?
Yes, sir. Now it is visible.
Okay. So my point is that if we do not resolve this problem now, the problem of water sharing of Blue Nile River between Ethiopia and Egypt, this problem will aggravate, and I am sure that after 10 years, 15 years, insurgency will erupt in this area, and thereafter we will only regret. And I keep studying these subjects, and my thinking is that this dispute is not going to get resolved. Why this dispute is not going to get resolved is, my thought process is that the culture eats the strategy. I have served there in this place, Ethiopia and Eritrea, in UN. Now the culture there is not to resolve the problem. They take pride in taking revenge. And they take pride, if conflict take place, we will go for war and all. So that kind of culture, so the culture, it eats the strategy. People might be, they might be aware that yes, it might be a problem later on, but they will focus more on the construction and filling of dam rather than resolving this issue forever. And we will see after 10 years, it is going to become a problem. Now, this is my last slide, and here I would like to tell that there is another problem in our neighborhood. You see Tibetan Plateau, and this map shows 13 major rivers which are emanating from Tibetan Plateau. Now again, I told you earlier that this map, I am talking about the half the world, 50% of the world's population. And Tibetan Plateau, you go into history, you see the maps and everything. Tibetan culture is a different culture. They were independent people. But in 1950s, you all know what happened, that the China captured Tibet, and now it has become a part of Tibet. And Dalai Lama, he crossed over from Tibet through Tawang, and we had given asylum to Dalai Lama. Now, my point is that the people, the leaders who are responsible in South Asia and Southeast Asia, responsible leaders I am talking about, their job is to have a vision so that this region of earth remains peaceful. They should know that Tibetan plateau is the water source of the all the civilizations which have flourished in this region. You see all these rivers, the entire civilization in this area, they are totally dependent on these rivers. Now, tomorrow something happens there in Tibetan plateau. Now, people will say, what will happen? People will say that ice will flow, water will flow, and if there will be any conflict, will no, it's not like that. Now, again, I'll give you the last example of my presentation. When I had joined, I was a young officer, and my 2IC that time, he told me, I said, sir, why don't we go for war and all? I'm talking about 2001 when this parliament attack took place. So he explained me, and you can go into the records and check that when during this after the parliament attack, during Operation Parakram, Tony Blair had visited both the countries, India and Pakistan. And you know why? Why they had visited? Because the issue had gone so far that both the countries were about to start the war and all, and everybody knew that both the countries have got nuclear weapons. And there was a possibility wherein India and Pakistan, if get into the nuclear war, then you see the Tibetan plateau. The nuclear scientists, they had warned that it might happen that the fallout, if the wind direction is towards east, then fallout will pollute the water of Tibetan plateau with nuclear radiations, and that will have adverse effect in Southeast Asia. So the countries in Southeast Asia, they said, no, it's not acceptable, just not acceptable. So, and there was a very high probability that both the countries are nuclear nation. Now my point is that can't you make Tibetan plateau as a buffer zone? I mean, some kind of resolution. The entire population is dependent on the water of Tibet. Now, if a war takes place, like we all know that what kind of situation was there 1.5 months back between India and China. Now, if war will take place, definitely it is going to take place in Tibetan plateau, along Tibetan plateau. And definitely there would be, you can't rule out, you can't say, our nuclear policy is very clear that if you fire a nuclear weapon, chemical weapon or biological weapon onto our forces in India or anywhere in the world, we will go for massive retaliation. Now, if we go for massive retaliation on Tibetan plateau, then what? So my point is, now, the point what I want to make is that we always focus on our career. In our schools, universities, and whichever institution we join, our focus is towards individual progress. We study subjects like public administration, political science. We study about the conflicts. I have done my graduation in public administration and political science, but what I want that right from the beginning, we should give some kind of teaching to the students that the thought process should be of conflict resolution and peaceful coexistence. And they should be given exposure of global conflict so that they understand that what kind of they build the human resource, somebody becomes engineers, scientists, doctors and all. Now, everything will go well, it will become zero. The net result would be zero. And you don't need a separate subject, introduction of separate subject to this. No, it's not like that. My point is our culture, our culture should be such that in informal ways, the professors, the teachers, they should train our next generation that the most important thing is conflict resolution. Whether it is in college, small conflicts, whatever, but they should be given the exposure of global conflict, that if this thing takes place, you talk about Rohingya, 7.5 lakh population moved out from Arakan region from Myanmar in last 3 years. And they are living like, you see their camps and all, and you'll find that there is nothing there. Some of them, they are doctors, engineers, but they had to move out because there was a conflict there in Myanmar. They said that you can't stay here. And they blame the Rohingyas, they blame that the Myanmar army was burning their houses, they were killing their people. So everybody moved out. So that was all. And in the end, I thank Parul University that they had given me this opportunity. And Professor Himal Patel, I thank you very much that you coordinated it well. And thank you very much.
Okay, sir. There is a two question. Question will be asked by madam. Wait a minute, sir.